The Zorvans had arrived with an overwhelming force, their massive ships descending from the sky like harbingers of doom. The world's major cities were torn apart in a matter of hours as they unleashed their weaponry. The air was thick with ash and smoke, and the once proud human race was reduced to desperate survival. Governments collapsed within days, and military forces scrambled to mount a defense against an enemy they could barely comprehend. Humans had never faced an enemy like the Zorvans. They were taller, faster, and far more advanced in technology. Their ships were a sight to behold, sleek, metallic, and nearly invulnerable to human weapons. Any attempt to fight back only resulted in brutal retaliation. Entire battalions of soldiers were wiped out in seconds by the Zorvans' energy weapons, and the human government's pleas for help from other nations went unanswered. Humanity was alone. In the heart of the ruined city of New York, a small group of survivors gathered in the shadows, hidden beneath the crumbled remnants of skyscrapers. Marcus, a former soldier, stood at the forefront, his eyes burning with determination. His once pristine uniform was torn and dirty, a far cry from the man who had once commanded armies. But in the face of impossible odds, he had become a symbol of hope. "Listen up," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "We've been dealt a bad hand, but we're not done. We have one shot at this, one chance to show them that Earth isn't going down without a fight." The group of rebels, a mix of soldiers, scientists, and civilians, nodded grimly. They were all too aware of the reality. The Zorvans were systematically hunting down any remaining human resistance, making it seem like the end was near. But Marcus had never been one to give up easily. "Marcus, do you really think we stand a chance?" a woman named Kelly asked, her voice tinged with doubt. He turned to face her, his expression hardening. "We have something they didn't count on. They think we're just primitive, but there's more to humanity than they know." As they prepared for the next mission, sabotaging the Zorvan supply line, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing within him. The fight wasn't just physical anymore. It was deeper, something instinctual. The Zorvans used their advanced technology to control minds, but somehow, humanity was resisting. A sense of unease had begun to ripple through the Zorvans. They had never encountered this kind of resistance before. It was almost as if humans were waking up to something within themselves. In a nearby alleyway, hidden beneath the rubble, a young boy named Eli was experimenting with his newfound power. The Zorvans had tried to control him using their mind control tech, but instead of falling under their influence, he had broken free. For the first time, he moved an object with his mind. Nothing large, just a discarded can of soda, but it was enough to make him realize the potential within himself. He wasn't sure what it meant, but he knew it was something the Zorvans had never expected. Back at the rebel base, Marcus was deep in thought, reviewing maps of the Zorvan encampment. He had a feeling that the tide was about to turn, but he also knew that the Zorvans would not go down easily. The true fight for Earth was only just beginning. The world was in flames, but there was a flicker of something in the ashes, something that could change everything. And Marcus would make sure humanity seized it. The resistance had begun to grow, though it was still fragile. Small cells of fighters scattered across the planet, each group holding on by the skin of their teeth, but all united in one goal: to push back against the Zorvans. Marcus, now more than ever, felt the weight of leadership. Each victory, no matter how small, was a message that humanity wasn't ready to be conquered. Not yet. The rebels had learned quickly that the Zorvans weren't invincible. There were weaknesses in their technology. It started with their weapons, but soon it became clear that their advanced tech, ship shields, energy weapons, even their surveillance systems, could be disrupted. The key to it all was an element that only Earth possessed, one that the Zorvans had failed to understand: an isotope found deep within Earth's crust. This rare substance had the power to interfere with the aliens' technology, short-circuiting their devices in ways no one had anticipated. Dr. Lena Carter, a former researcher from the world's leading scientific institute, had been pivotal in discovering this anomaly. While her lab had once focused on theoretical physics, now it was her understanding of Earth's unique resources that made her invaluable to the Resistance. "We can use this to our advantage," Lena had said, showing Marcus a crude prototype of a weapon that could disable Zorvan tech in a matter of seconds. "But we need more of it, and we need to hit them where it hurts." Marcus was determined to make that happen. They needed to strike at the heart of the Zorvan infrastructure, where they were hoarding the rare materials that kept their machines functioning. The human fighters had learned to exploit Zorvan weaknesses, hitting their supply chains, sabotaging their energy stations, and making the aliens realize that they couldn't control everything. But it wasn't enough. "You're sure this is going to work?" Kelly, one of Marcus's closest allies, asked as they stood over the makeshift blueprints for the attack. Her eyes were heavy from sleepless nights spent planning, but there was a fire in her that couldn't be extinguished. "It's our best shot," Marcus replied, his voice calm but resolute. He was no longer just a soldier. He was the symbol of human resistance. But even as they prepared for the next mission, he could sense the growing unease among his team. The Zorvans hadn't made a full-scale move yet, but their patience was wearing thin. They knew humans were behind the sabotage. Meanwhile, in an underground bunker located beneath the remnants of a city once called London, the humans' psychic powers were beginning to manifest more clearly. The first signs had been small, minor telekinesis, brief moments of telepathy. But now they were becoming more potent. Some human rebels could now affect the environment around them, moving larger objects with ease. Others were tapping into their minds in new ways, coordinating attacks with nothing more than a thought. Eli, the young boy who had moved the soda can in the earlier days, was at the forefront of this strange evolution. His powers were growing faster than anyone could have imagined, and he had begun to train under Lena's guidance. Though still a child, Eli's ability to connect with others telepathically was unprecedented, and he was learning to control it with startling speed. But even Lena couldn't fully explain what was happening. It was as if the war itself was awakening something deep within the human psyche. "Marcus," Lena said one night, pulling him aside as they prepared to launch their next mission. "We need to talk. The psychic abilities, they're escalating faster than I expected. It's not just survival instincts driving this anymore. It's something else. I think we're tapping into a latent potential." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "You think this could be the key to turning the tide?" Lena nodded slowly. "I do. But we need to be careful. The Zorvans don't know about this, but once they do, they'll target it. If they realize how powerful this could become." Marcus finished the thought for her. "They'll do everything in their power to stop it." Just as they were about to finalize their plans, an alarm blared through the Resistance base. Zorvan ships were approaching, far earlier than anyone had anticipated. "We move out now," Marcus barked, his voice cutting through the tension. "Prepare for a fight. This time, we hit them where it hurts." The Resistance's success in disrupting the Zorvan supply lines marked a turning point in the war. Humanity was no longer simply surviving. They were fighting back, adapting in ways the Zorvans never anticipated. But as each day passed, Marcus felt the growing pressure. The Zorvans had been a powerful enemy, and they weren't known for their patience. Sooner or later, they would launch a full-scale assault to crush the humans once and for all. Lena's words echoed in his mind. "We're tapping into something bigger than we understand." Humanity's psychic abilities were becoming more refined, but they were also unpredictable. While some humans could now manipulate objects with their minds, others were exhibiting more dangerous abilities, psychic blasts that could incapacitate Zorvan soldiers or telepathic linkages that allowed entire resistance cells to coordinate attacks across vast distances. And then there was Eli. The young boy had become a living anomaly, his powers growing exponentially by the day. Lena had begun to focus her research on him, hoping to understand how a child could hold such extraordinary abilities. Eli, despite being just 12, was able to access the collective mind of the humans around him. With a simple thought, He could connect with the soldiers and strategists in the resistance, guiding them in real time, anticipating Zorvan movements with a precision that would have been impossible only months before. Yet, despite his raw power, Eli remained scared, often questioning whether he could control the abilities that were overtaking him. Lena had become a mentor to him, guiding him through meditation exercises and training sessions, but even Lena was unsure where his abilities would lead. One evening, as Marcus reviewed the latest intel, Lena approached him. Her expression was grave, her mind clearly on more than just their next attack. "Marcus," she began, "I've been thinking about Eli. His powers, they're evolving faster than we can track. We could be on the verge of something extraordinary, or something catastrophic." Marcus's eyes narrowed. He knew the risks, but there was no turning back now. "What are you suggesting?" Lena hesitated. "If we can train Eli, if we can push his abilities to their limits, he could become the key to winning this war. But there's no guarantee he'll be able to control it. The psychic energy he's tapping into is unlike anything I've ever seen." Marcus clenched his fists. "If he's the key, then we have to protect him." But as Lena opened her mouth to respond, a crackling sound came over the base's communication system. The voice of one of the scouts, panicked and urgent, filled the room. "They're here, Zorvan dropships, inbound. They've found our location." The resistance scrambled into action, the base descending into chaos. Marcus and Lena exchanged a glance, their previous conversation forgotten for the moment. The fight was on. Within moments, Marcus led the charge, rallying his team. The base had been hidden under layers of rubble, and the Zorvans hadn't been able to pinpoint its exact location, until now. As the first dropships hit the ground, soldiers in Zorvan exosuits emerged, weapons drawn. But humanity had learned quickly, and their psychic abilities made them a far greater threat than the Zorvans had ever considered. The battle began in earnest. As Marcus and his team engaged the Zorvans, Lena focused her energy on guiding Eli, helping him tap into the psychic potential he was still learning to control. In the heat of the battle, Eli's powers flared to life. For the first time, he reached out to the minds of the Zorvans themselves, disrupting their communication systems and causing confusion in their ranks. It was working. The Zorvans were losing their grip on the battlefield, their once organized assault disintegrating under the weight of humanity's newfound powers. But the true test came when Marcus and his team were surrounded, trapped in a narrow alley as Zorvan exosuits closed in from all sides. Eli's voice rang out in Marcus's mind, calm despite the chaos. "I can stop them. Let me." Marcus hesitated. The boy was still too young, still too unpredictable. But he had no other choice. "Do it, Eli." In a sudden burst of psychic energy, Eli unleashed a wave of force that sent the Zorvan exosuits flying backward. The enemy was thrown into disarray as the psychic shockwave tore through their ranks. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then the soldiers scrambled to regain control, but it was too late. The resistance surged forward, pushing the Zorvans back, taking control of the battlefield. When the dust finally settled, Marcus found Lena, her face pale with shock and exhaustion. And standing beside her, eyes wide with wonder, was Eli. "We did it," Lena said quietly. "But at what cost?" Marcus looked at Eli. The boy's potential was limitless, but so was the danger. The Zorvans would not sit idly by. They had just uncovered the one thing the aliens feared the most, humanity's ability to adapt and rise. And now, the war had shifted. But as Marcus looked at the young boy, he knew the fight was far from over. The battle at the base was a victory, but it came with a heavy price. As the Zorvans retreated, their forces scattered in disarray, the resistance felt a rare sense of triumph. But it was a fleeting emotion. The real war was far from over. Marcus stood on a rooftop overlooking the battlefield, the smoldering ruins of the Zorvan dropships still burning in the distance. He could see the small pockets of humanity emerging from the shadows, gathering their wounded, and preparing for the next fight, the fight that would determine the fate of the planet. Lena joined him on the rooftop, her face weary but determined. "It won't be long before they regroup," she said, eyes scanning the horizon. "They're smart, and they'll come back harder than before. But now we've shown them that we can fight back. We've also shown them something else." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Eli's powers," she said quietly. "We don't know the full extent of what he can do, but he just broke their lines. If we can harness that, it could be a game changer." Marcus frowned. "We can't rely on one kid to win this. We need more of those abilities, more humans with that kind of power." Lena nodded. "I agree. But Eli, he's different. His connection to the psychic energy is more intense than anyone else's. I'm worried about him." Marcus's eyes darkened. He'd been worried about Eli too. The boy's powers were growing at an alarming rate, and there were signs of instability. When they'd last connected, the strain on Eli had been evident, his breathing shallow and his eyes wide with the kind of fear only someone who knew they were losing control could have. Yet Eli's power had helped save the team, and his potential was undeniable. "We can't afford to wait," Marcus said, turning back to the city. "We have to strike while we have the momentum. The Zorvans will figure out what we did, and they'll adapt. But we can use that against them. They'll try to counter our psychic abilities with their nullifier. But if we hit them first—" "If we hit them where it hurts," Lena interrupted, finishing his thought. "We need to find where they're developing the nullifier and destroy it before it becomes fully operational." Marcus nodded. "We'll need a team. And this time, we're going for the heart of their operation." The planning began immediately. Intel gathered from the previous skirmishes suggested that the Zorvans were constructing a new, highly advanced version of the nullifier deep within one of their most secure facilities. If the Zorvans completed it, they could neutralize humanity's psychic abilities once and for all. Marcus couldn't let that happen. If humanity was to stand a chance, they had to strike hard and fast. But there was more at stake than just the battle itself. The psychic abilities that had begun to emerge in humans were still unpredictable. Every day, more and more people were experiencing powers they couldn't control, and the strain on the human mind was becoming apparent. Some of the resistance fighters had started to break under the pressure, their abilities becoming erratic and dangerous. Marcus knew that every time a new power was unleashed, it pushed the human psyche further into uncharted territory. As the team prepared for their mission, Marcus turned to Eli, who was sitting quietly in a corner of the base. The boy's face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he focused on something only he could see. "Eli," Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm, "I need you to focus on your training. We're going after the nullifier, and I need you to be ready." Eli looked up, his eyes wide with an intensity that scared Marcus. "I don't know if I can do this. I'm not sure I can control it anymore." Lena approached, kneeling beside the boy. "Eli, you've already proven that you're stronger than any of us imagined. But you need to stay calm. You need to remember what we've practiced." Eli nodded slowly, though his expression was filled with doubt. "I'll try." Marcus placed a hand on Eli's shoulder, giving him a reassuring squeeze. "That's all any of us can do. We don't know what we're walking into, but we're doing it together. You're not alone in this." As the team geared up for the mission, a heavy silence fell over the base. The weight of what they were about to attempt hung over them like a dark cloud. If they failed, the Zorvans would surely wipe out every last trace of humanity. But if they succeeded, it could be the key to breaking the Zorvan stranglehold on Earth. The mission was set. The Zorvans would soon understand that their enemies had changed. The humans they had once underestimated had evolved into something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. And for the first time, the Zorvans would truly fear them. The strike team was assembled and ready to go. Marcus stood in front of them, his mind racing. The mission was risky. Nothing about it was certain. But failure wasn't an option. If they didn't succeed in destroying the Zorvan's nullifier, Their psychic abilities would be neutralized, and humanity would be back at square one. The Zorvans would win. Eli stood to the side, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his face pale. His powers had grown exponentially over the last few days, but so had the weight of his responsibility. He was no longer just a child in a world at war. He was humanity's secret weapon, and that was both a gift and a curse. The fear in his eyes was unmistakable, but it was something Marcus had seen in himself too when he had first stood on the front lines. Fear could be useful. Fear meant you cared, and that was something the Zorvans would never understand. "You're ready," Lena said quietly, her voice filled with reassurance as she checked Eli's gear. "We all are." Eli nodded, though his nervousness still lingered. He hadn't had time to practice fully controlling his abilities, and every time he tapped into his power, there was a part of him that feared what might happen if it spiraled out of control. "I just don't know if I can do this," he whispered, almost to himself. Marcus crouched beside him, his voice calm but firm. "You've already done more than most people could dream of. You're not alone in this. We're in this together." Eli gave him a small, uncertain smile. He appreciated the reassurance, but the weight of what was about to happen was far heavier than words could ease. Still, he nodded, determined to see it through. He didn't have much choice. This was bigger than himself. The team moved quickly through the shadows, staying as quiet as possible. The Zorvans had fortified their base deep underground, and the facility was surrounded by heavily armed guards. But the humans had learned how to strike from the shadows. With their psychic abilities disrupting the enemy's surveillance, they managed to sneak past the outer perimeter and into the heart of the Zorvan stronghold. The facility's corridors were cold and sterile, lit by harsh, flickering lights. It was clear that the Zorvans treated this place with the utmost importance, but they hadn't expected to face an opponent like humanity. Marcus's team moved with precision, every step calculated, every move part of the larger strategy. They knew that the nullifier, their target, was buried deep within the complex, but first, they had to get past the guards. Lena raised her hand and gestured toward a nearby door, her psychic abilities flaring as she subtly manipulated the minds of the Zorvan sentries. The guards paused, confusion spreading across their faces as they stood motionless, unaware of the human team creeping past them. They were now just a few steps away from the core of the facility. As they continued to push forward, the tension inside Marcus grew. The Zorvans had been silent for too long. He knew they would be ready for them soon. But when they reached the chamber where the nullifier was stored, they found something unexpected. A massive, swirling energy field surrounded it, a defense the humans hadn't anticipated. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before, and it hummed with an eerie dark power. "We didn't expect this," Lena muttered under her breath, studying the energy field. "The nullifier is protected by a psychic barrier. It's absorbing any psychic energy that comes near it." Marcus clenched his jaw. This wasn't a setback. It was a challenge. "We're not backing down now. We're too close." Eli's heart was pounding. He had been trained for this moment, but seeing the swirling barrier was enough to shake him. He was terrified of losing control, of unleashing something he couldn't stop. But then he remembered the look in Marcus's eyes. The trust. The belief that they could do this. "I can try," Eli said, his voice shaky but determined. "I can focus. I can break through." Lena placed a hand on Eli's shoulder, her gaze soft but firm. "You have to be careful. This barrier is unlike anything you've encountered." Eli nodded, taking a deep breath. As he focused, the psychic energy around him began to hum, the vibrations in his mind matching the frequency of the barrier. He reached out, his mind stretching toward the swirling energy field. At first, nothing happened. His thoughts were drowned by the overwhelming power of the barrier. But then, just as he thought he couldn't go any further, he felt it. A weak spot. With everything he had, Eli pushed through, his power flaring in a burst of psychic force. The energy field wavered, then shattered like glass, and the nullifier was exposed. The team didn't waste a second. Marcus gave the signal, and the explosives were set. But before they could detonate, a chilling voice echoed through the chamber. "You think you can stop us?" A Zorvan commander's voice boomed, amplified by the facility speakers. "You're too late." The ground beneath their feet shook, and the doors to the chamber slammed shut. The Zorvans were closing in, and they were ready for a fight. The doors slammed shut with a deafening crash, and Marcus's heart skipped a beat. They were trapped. "Move, now," he barked, but it was too late. The Zorvans had anticipated their every move, and now the walls were closing in. Marcus quickly assessed the room. The nullifier was within reach, its strange humming energy filling the air. But the mission had just become much more complicated. "We can't fight our way out of this," Lena said, her eyes darting around the room as she scanned for a possible escape route. "They've sealed us in." Marcus's instincts kicked in. He motioned for his team to move into position. "Eli, we need that nullifier down. Now." Eli's breath came in shallow gasps, his small frame trembling with the effort of controlling his powers. Sweat dotted his forehead, and his hand shook as he concentrated. The psychic barrier had been a massive strain on him, and now, with the Zorvans closing in, the pressure was mounting. His eyes were wide with fear, but there was determination beneath it. I can't do it again," Eli whispered, his voice quivering. "It's too much. I can't control it." Lena stepped forward, kneeling beside him. "You can do this, Eli. I've seen you. You've already broken through once. You're stronger than you think. But you need to stay calm." The room was growing colder, the Zorvan's footsteps echoing closer. Marcus glanced at his team. Kelly, Ash, and the others were preparing for a last stand, but it was clear that if they didn't act quickly, they wouldn't survive long enough to finish the job. Eli's hands clenched into fists. His fear was palpable, but so was his resolve. He wanted to save his people. He had to. His entire life had led to this moment. With a deep breath, Eli reached out again, his mind pulsing with energy as he focused on the nullifier. The room around him blurred, and he could feel the hum of the device vibrating through the floor. He found the weak point, but this time, something was different. As he pushed against the nullifier's energy field, a surge of force flooded his senses, a violent wave of power that nearly overwhelmed him. Pain shot through his temples, and Eli cried out, I can't hold it." Lena grabbed his arm, her voice steady despite the chaos. "You're doing it, Eli. Just hold on. It's working." And then, with a roar of effort, Eli released all his psychic energy in one explosive burst. The nullifier's field crackled and snapped, bending under the immense force. The machine groaned, and then, with a final shudder, it shattered into a cascade of sparks and energy. The chamber filled with a resounding silence. But the victory was short-lived. The Zorvans burst through the doors just as the nullifier fell. A dozen armored soldiers flooded the room, their weapons raised. "Get ready," Marcus shouted, his voice raw with urgency. The resistance team fought back immediately. Kelly and Ash opened fire, their weapons cutting through the Zorvans' ranks with deadly precision, but they were outnumbered. Marcus moved with military precision, his mind calculating their every move, but the odds were stacked against them. Eli, still reeling from the psychic backlash, staggered to his feet. His hands were trembling violently, and his eyes were wide with pain. He couldn't even hear his own thoughts over the ringing in his ears. But then he saw Marcus, his leader, pushing forward, holding the line, and something clicked in him. He had to fight. They had to win. With all the strength he could muster, Eli reached out again, this time targeting the Zorvans themselves. His power flared, and for a split second, the world seemed to stop. The Zorvan soldiers staggered, their minds bombarded by waves of force that left them disoriented and dazed. Eli could feel the strain on his own body, but it didn't matter. He was fighting for something greater than himself. "Marcus," Lena shouted, "get to the exit. We need to go now." Marcus nodded, his voice steady. "Move out now." With the Zorvans temporarily disoriented, the resistance fought their way through the chaos. Eli was struggling to maintain his focus, but he wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when they had a chance to win. He pushed through the pain, using his powers to hold off the Zorvans just long enough for the team to escape. They'd made it to the exit. The Zorvans weren't far behind, but for the first time, humanity had taken the fight to them, and they were leaving with a victory, not just a retreat. As the resistance team fled the facility, Eli stumbled, his vision blurring. Lena caught him before he hit the ground, her voice urgent but full of care. "You did it, Eli. You saved us." But Eli wasn't sure. The toll of his powers weighed heavily on him. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep this up. He had only scratched the surface of what he could do, but what would happen to him, to everyone, if he couldn't control it? The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The escape from the Zorvan facility was a narrow one, but the resistance had succeeded in their primary objective. They had destroyed the nullifier. As the team retreated into the wilderness, the sound of distant explosions echoed behind them. They had disrupted the Zorvans' plans, but the victory was bittersweet. The fight was far from over, and the cost was becoming clearer by the day. Eli's breathing was ragged as they moved. His legs were shaky, and his eyes were half-lidded with exhaustion. Every step he took seemed to sap more of his strength. The psychic backlash from using his powers had drained him, and despite Lena's reassurances, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was teetering on the edge of something dangerous. His mind felt like it was stretching too thin, and the shadows of doubt crept in. Could he really control his abilities? Could he keep pushing himself without losing everything? "Eli, you did great," Lena said, her voice soft as she walked beside him, her hand gently resting on his arm to steady him. "You saved us all. You should be proud." Eli looked up at her, offering a weak smile. "I'm trying. But it doesn't feel like enough. What if I can't keep doing this? What if I hurt someone?" Lena's eyes softened with understanding. She had seen the toll his powers were taking on him, and though she had tried to help him control them, she knew there was only so much guidance she could offer. "Eli, the fact that you're even questioning it shows how much you care. You're human, and that makes you stronger than anything the Zorvans have. But you need rest. You need time to heal." Marcus, who had been leading the group, turned around to face them. His expression was grim but focused. "We don't have time to rest right now. The Zorvans will be regrouping, and they won't stop until they hunt us down. We need to get to the next safe house and reassess." Lena's eyes narrowed, her thoughts shifting immediately back to the war. The destruction of the nullifier had been a victory, but it was only one step in a much longer journey. The Zorvans weren't done. They couldn't be. They would come back stronger, more ruthless, and now they knew just how dangerous humanity had become. They would target the resistance more aggressively. And worse, they might come for Eli, specifically. If they figured out the true source of his power, he could become their greatest weapon to destroy. "We need to move quickly," Lena said, her tone firm. "I'll start working on a plan to harness Eli's abilities better. We need to figure out how to make him more stable. His power is incredible, but we can't keep pushing him to his limits without consequences." Eli looked at her, his expression a mixture of gratitude and worry. "I don't want to be the reason everyone gets hurt. What if I lose control?" Marcus placed a hand on Eli's shoulder, steadying him. "You won't lose control, Eli. You're stronger than you think, and we're all here to make sure that doesn't happen. You don't have to carry this burden alone." Eli nodded slowly, still unsure. He had come so far in such a short amount of time, and he knew that the next step would be even harder. He couldn't afford to let his doubts overwhelm him. Not now, not when humanity's future was at stake. As they continued their journey through the wilderness, the tension grew thicker. They had left behind the smoldering remains of the Zorvan base, but the real danger lay ahead. The Zorvans wouldn't let this failure go unpunished. They would come after them, and this time, they would be more prepared. It wasn't just the nullifier that had to be destroyed. They had to break the Zorvans' will to fight, to make them realize that humanity could not be enslaved or defeated. That thought, that hope, fueled Marcus as he glanced over his shoulder, watching his team. They were tired, but they were determined. They were fighting for survival, but they were also fighting for something bigger, for freedom, for the future of the human race. Eli's role in this battle had become central. They couldn't afford to let him fall. The Zorvans had underestimated humanity's strength once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. The Resistance had proven that they could strike back, and now it was time to take the fight to the next level. "We need to keep pushing forward," Marcus said, his voice steady. "This is just the beginning." As the team disappeared into the dense forest, the weight of the battle ahead pressed down on them. The Zorvans would not give up easily, but they had just learned a valuable lesson. Humans were not to be underestimated. The Resistance had won a battle, but the war was far from over. And with Eli's growing power, humanity might just have the edge they needed to defeat the Zorvans once and for all. The forest was dense, the trees tall and thick, their branches intertwined like a natural fortress. But for the Resistance, it wasn't enough. The Zorvans had advanced technology, surveillance systems, and elite soldiers. No place on Earth was truly safe. The brief respite they had gained from the destruction of the nullifier was already slipping away. Marcus knew it was only a matter of time before the Zorvans tracked them down. The team made camp in a small clearing, the light from the campfire casting long shadows against the trees. Eli sat apart from the others, his gaze distant. His powers were a constant presence in his mind, both a blessing and a curse. He could feel the hum of energy beneath his skin, a pulse he couldn't escape. The more he used his abilities, the more it felt like they were pulling him in different directions, threatening to consume him entirely. Lena sat next to him, her eyes scanning the woods for any signs of danger. "You've been quiet," she remarked, her voice gentle. Eli glanced at her, his face weary. "I don't know what's happening to me. Every time I use my powers, it feels like a little more of me slips away. I don't know if I can keep doing this." Lena understood the weight of his words. She had seen the toll his powers took on him, how they drained him both physically and mentally. She knew that Eli wasn't just fighting the Zorvans. He was fighting against himself, and that was a battle no one should have to face alone. "You're not alone, Eli," Lena said softly. "None of us are. You have the team, and you have me. We'll figure this out together." Eli managed a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I want to believe that, but the more I use my abilities, the more I feel like I'm losing myself, like I'm becoming something I can't control." Before Lena could respond, Marcus approached, his face grim. "We need to move. The Zorvans are closing in faster than we thought. They've already traced us to this sector. We'll have to make our way through the mountains to the next safe house." The team gathered quickly, packing up their belongings and preparing to move. The air was thick with tension. The enemy wasn't far behind, and the next battle could very well be their last. But despite the danger, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Humanity had fought back before, and they would do it again. They had proven that they could stand against the Zorvans, that they could survive their onslaught. As they began their trek toward the mountains, Eli walked slowly behind the group, his thoughts a swirling mess. He couldn't shake the fear that had settled in his chest. He had always been just a regular kid, until now. Now he was the most powerful weapon humanity had, and it terrified him. If his powers spiraled out of control, if he couldn't rein them in, what would happen to the people he cared about? What would happen to the world? Marcus turned back to check on him, his eyes filled with understanding. "Eli, I know this isn't easy, but we're counting on you. You've done more than anyone could ask. You're the reason we're still fighting. You're the reason humanity has a chance." Eli looked up, meeting Marcus's gaze. I don't feel like a hero. I feel like I'm falling apart. Marcus's expression softened. You're not falling apart. You're still human. And being human doesn't mean being perfect. It means having the strength to keep going, even when it's hard. Lena caught up to them, placing a hand on Eli's shoulder. And we'll help you every step of the way. Together, we can figure out how to control this. Together, we'll win. Eli nodded slowly, taking comfort in their words, but the uncertainty lingered. The weight of the world was on his shoulders, and no amount of reassurance could erase the fear gnawing at him. The night passed in tense silence as they continued their journey. The mountain pass was difficult, the terrain treacherous, and every rustling sound in the forest set their nerves on edge. But as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the team reached the safe house, a small, secluded cabin nestled between two peaks. They collapsed inside, exhausted and weary, but the brief respite was a welcome one. They had survived another night, and for now, that was enough. But Marcus knew that this was just the calm before the storm. The Zorvans would not stop. They would hunt them relentlessly until they were destroyed. And if Eli couldn't control his powers, they risked losing everything. We have to make this next move count, Marcus said, his voice steady. We've destroyed the nullifier. Now we need to hit them where it hurts, take down their command center, and cripple their ability to retaliate. Eli sat in the corner, his eyes closed, his hands resting on his lap. He didn't respond, but the weight of Marcus's words settled on him like a stone. He didn't know how much longer he could keep this up. But he couldn't stop now. Humanity's future was in his hands, and he would do whatever it took to ensure they didn't lose it.